It started with small absences, not of presence, but of warmth. My son used to call every morning just to ask if I'd eaten breakfast. He'd tease me about the way I always made tea too strong, say it tasted like grief in a cup. But lately, his voice had changed. Shorter sentences, longer pauses. Calls that ended with, "I'll call you later, Mom." And later never came. At first, I told myself it was marriage, new routines, new priorities. Every son eventually drifts toward the life he builds, not the one he's born into. But there was something else beneath it, something cold and rehearsed. The kind of politeness that replaces affection when someone's already decided you're a burden. I noticed it the first time I visited after their wedding. The front door, once opened before I even knocked, now stayed closed until I rang the bell twice. My daughter-in-law, Lila, greeted me with that kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Her words were smooth, carefully measured, like she'd practiced them in a mirror. "Come in. Mrs. Hale, you didn't have to bring anything." She said it while taking the food I'd cooked from my hands, placing it on the counter like it was evidence. My son came out of the living room, tie half undone, distracted. He hugged me, yes, but it was one of those quick, stiff embraces that people give when someone's watching. His eyes darted to her before they met mine. "Hi, Mom, you didn't tell me you were coming." And there was the first small crack, because I had told him twice. We ate dinner in silence that night, a heavy quiet that wrapped around the table like fog. I spoke about the garden, how the roses had started to bloom early that year. He nodded absently. She smiled politely, and all the while, there was this invisible current between them, like she was signaling what he could say and what he shouldn't. When I left, she followed me to the door. "You should rest, Mrs. Hale," she said softly. "He's been under a lot of pressure lately. Maybe give him some space." Space, such a small word, such a devastating one. I walked home under the fading light, my hands cold despite the warmth of spring. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice, soft, careful, poisonous. Days passed. Weeks. The calls stopped completely. When I did reach him, he sounded distant. It's like he was reading lines from someone else's script. Then, one afternoon, he came over unexpectedly. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes avoiding mine as he stood in the doorway. "I remember the smell of rain that day, the way it clung to his jacket, Mom," he said quietly. "I think it's better if you take a break from visiting for a while. A break. As if love was something you could put on pause." He mumbled something about boundaries and space again. Words that didn't sound like his. Words that had the soft edges of manipulation. I didn't argue. I just stood there, holding the dish towel in my hand, watching my own child turn into a stranger. After he left, I sat on the couch for hours, staring at the empty teacup on the table. The house was too quiet. Even the clock seemed hesitant to tick. That night, I went through old photo albums, birthdays, graduations, moments caught in still frames where he used to look at me like I was home. I remembered the way he'd run to me as a child after falling off his bike, tears on his cheeks, grass stains on his knees. Back then, my arms were the safest place he knew. And now, somehow, I'd become the enemy. I kept asking myself what I'd done. Had I said something wrong? Interfered too much? Tried too hard to stay close? But the truth wasn't about MIT, was about her. About the quiet, careful way she rewrote the story of who I was in his life. I started noticing patterns. The way he repeated her phrases. "She thinks you need more help around the house," she said. "It's not healthy for me too. Worry about you so much. She feels you judge her sometimes." Each sentence was another brick in the wall. Between us, I didn't blame her, not yet. I told myself she was insecure, maybe jealous of our closeness. Maybe she just needed time to understand that a mother's love doesn't compete. It coexists. But the lies grew roots. I could feel them spreading. One afternoon, I decided to visit without calling. Maybe surprise him with his favorite soup, like old times. I remember holding that pot carefully on the bus, the smell of chicken broth and herbs filling the air. It reminded me of home, of everything simple and warm. When I reached their house, saw our car parked outside, but his wasn't there. I hesitated, then knocked. She opened the door just a little enough to make her point. "Oh," she said, pretending to be surprised. "He's not here, Mrs. Hale." I smiled. "That's all right. I'll wait." Her lips tightened. "I don't think that's a good idea. He's been really stressed. You showing up unannounced might make things worse." It's worse. The word stung like a slap. She didn't even bother to hide her irritation this time. She sighed, tilting her head slightly, and said, "You know, you can be a little much sometimes. He just needs peace." Peace. She meant without me. Something inside me shifted, then not anger. It's just a quiet ache, like glass cracking under too much weight. I turned and walked away. I didn't say another word. That night, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. I realized this was how love disappears, not in arguments or endings, but in distance, in the way someone slowly teaches another to forget you. But even in that silence, part of me refused to believe it was permanent. I told myself he'd come back, that one day he'd remember who I was to him. Still, in the back of my mind, I could feel it, the subtle, growing certainty that something was being taken from me, piece by piece, not by time, but by design. And I knew, though I didn't yet understand how deep it went, that this wasn't just loss. It was betrayal in slow motion. I stopped visiting after that day. I told myself it was for the best, that maybe distance would make him realize what he was losing. But distance doesn't heal when it's built on lies, it feeds them. Days blurred into weeks. The phone stayed silent. The house felt heavier than before, like grief had taken form and was sitting with me in every room. Then the gossip began. Subtle things, neighbors hinting that I'd been too controlling, that my son had finally set boundaries. Words carried by people who didn't even know our story. I wondered where they heard it. But deep down, I already knew. Lila had found her rhythm. She didn't just push me out of their home. She began erasing me from his narrative. I could feel it in the way his social media changed. Family photos disappeared, replaced with new ones, curated smiles, polished captions about fresh beginnings. In every picture, her hand rested on his chest like a signature. I tried not to look. But the human heart has a way of hurting itself on purpose. Every time I told myself I was done, I'd find myself scrolling again, memorizing the details of a life I no longer belonged to. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. She smiled politely, but her eyes hesitated. "I heard you moved to a retirement place," she said. I blinked. What?" Her smile faltered. "That's what your son told us. He said you wanted a quieter life away from the city." I stood there, holding a carton of milk I didn't remember picking up, and realized what was happening. They weren't just distancing me, they were rewriting me that night. I sat by the window again, staring out into the streetlights, feeling like I was watching the last pieces of my life fade behind glass. I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that. Instead, I started writing everything down. Dates, conversations, little things that didn't add up. It wasn't revenge. It was survival proof that I existed. A few weeks later, I received a message from him. A short one. "Mom, we're selling the house. You should start looking for somewhere else. Lila thinks it'll be better for everyone." It's just like that. My home, my years, my memories signed away with her name attached to the reason. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed. The walls around me suddenly foreign. I'd built that home after his father died. Every corner carried the weight of love, of sacrifice. The crack in the hallway paint where he'd drawn on the wall at 5. The loose floorboard in the kitchen always creaked no matter how many times I fixed it. And now it was all being packaged as better for everyone. The next morning, they came together. She stood beside him, clipboard in hand, efficient and pleasant, like a realtor instead of a wife. "Mom, we can help you pack," he said, glancing at her before he looked at me. I didn't answer. I just nodded. Sometimes silence is the only thing that keeps your dignity intact. As they walked through the house, I followed quietly behind, watching her touch everything that once belonged to us. She made notes about what to keep and what to donate. When she passed the old photo frames, she hesitated, then smiled faintly. "These can go," she said. My son didn't object. That was the moment I felt something die inside me, not love, not hope, but illusion. The illusion that he was still mine. When they left, I sat in the kitchen surrounded by half-filled boxes. It was strange how betrayal never arrived all at once. It seeped through walls, through words, through people who smiled as they tore you apart. I thought of calling him later that night just to hear his voice, to ask him if he remembered the day we moved into this house, how he'd promised to take care of me when I was old. But I didn't, because promises mean nothing when spoken by someone who's forgotten their mother's hands. Days later, as I packed my things, I found a small silver locket in the drawer, a picture of him as a child on one side, me holding him on the other. It had been his gift to me on Mother's Day years ago. I ran my thumb over the photo, the edges soft from time. That night, I wore it as I slept, just to remind myself that love had once been real. When the moving truck came, I didn't say goodbye. They didn't come to help. Maybe they thought I'd make a scene. Maybe they were afraid of guilt. The new apartment was small. One bedroom, no garden, no creaking floorboard to complain about. But it was mine, quiet, empty. A place where no one could tell me I was too much. At first I thought I'd wither in that silence. But silence, when you've been pushed out of someone else's noise, starts to feel like freedom. Still, I'd wake at night sometimes, hearing his laughter echoing in my memory, the way he used to call me Ma when he needed something, Mom when he meant it. Now, both words were gone. It was around then that I began to notice something else. Guilt has a pattern. It leaves trails. Small, unintentional gestures that reveal more than words ever do. He'd send money sometimes, unasked for, unsigned. Bank transfers labeled miscellaneous. As if love could be itemized. I never spent a penny. I kept it all in a separate account and touched, unloved, like the gesture itself. The final break came months later. My birthday. I didn't expect a visit, but I still hoped for one. Hope is stubborn that way. Instead, I got a message. "Hey Mom, sorry I can't come by today. Lila planned something for us. Hope you understand." Understand. Always that word. I sat alone at the table, a single candle flickering on the cake I'd bought myself. I didn't blow it out right away. I just watched it burn until the wax touched the frosting and went out on its own. That night, I made a decision. Not out of anger, but clarity. I realized that love can't survive in a place where respect is dead. And forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone keep hurting you. So I began rearranging my will. Slowly, carefully. Every signature is deliberate. Every name is intentional. My lawyer asked if I was sure. I said yes. Because I wasn't taking revenge, was simply reclaiming what was mine. I didn't cut him out of my life that day. I simply stopped waiting for him to come back into it, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night. Months passed. Seasons changed, but my heart didn't. I moved through days like a ghost in my own story, existing, but barely. The world outside my window kept living, growing, rushing forward. While I stayed suspended somewhere between memory and loss, I didn't see my son, not once. Sometimes I'd catch myself setting an extra plate at the table out of habit, or boiling water for 2 cups of tea before remembering I only needed one. Little remnants of love that refused to understand it was no longer wanted. Still, I didn't regret leaving quietly. Some goodbyes don't need noise. They just need courage. Then, one morning, a letter came. Not from him, from a lawyer. At first, I thought it was a mistake. The envelope was thick, official, with my son's name listed alongside his wife's. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a financial request, a formal document asking for partial access to the family business. Shares my late husband had left behind. Shares I'd kept in my name since his death. There was a note attached in Lila's neat, curved handwriting. "It's just business." We thought it made sense for everything to be in one place. I sat in silence for a long time. the paper trembling in my hand. Business. That word again? Always practical, always polished. Never human. That's when I understood. This was never about family. Never about peace or space. It was about control. I wasn't being pushed out of their lives because I was toxic. I was being cleared out efficiently, systematically, because I still owned something she wanted. That realization didn't break me. It clarified me. I didn't sign the document. I didn't call. I didn't argue. I simply made an appointment with my lawyer the next morning and finalized what I had only begun my will. I left everything to a foundation in my late husband's name. His legacy would serve those who needed help, not those who traded love for greed, and under family, where my son's name used to be, I left a blank space. Not out of hatred, but honesty. He had removed me from his life long before I removed him from my papers. After that, I didn't think of them much. Not out of bitterness, but because peace is loud enough when you stop chasing closure. Then, one evening, I heard a knock. I wasn't expecting anyone. The sound was hesitant, almost unfamiliar. When I opened the door, my son stood there. He looked thinner, older somehow. His eyes carried that strange tension of someone trying to balance guilt and pride. "Hi, Mom." I didn't answer right away. I just stepped aside, and he walked in like a stranger visiting a museum of his own past. His gaze drifted over the small apartment, the secondhand furniture. "The photos on the wall? I didn't know you lived like this," he said quietly. I smiled faintly. "Like what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he handed me an envelope. "You forgot some papers at the lawyer's office. Lila thought I should bring them." Her name again? The echo of control. I took the envelope and placed it on the table. "How is she?" I asked softly. He hesitated. "She's fine." There was something behind his tone of tightness, a flicker of doubt. I caught it, but didn't mention it. Silence has a way of making people reveal more than questions ever do. He sat down across from me, fidgeting with his hands. For a moment, he looked like the boy I used to know, the one who brought me wildflowers from the yard and apologized before I ever asked him to. "Mom," he said finally, "did you really change your will?" The words hung between us, heavy and electric. "Yes." His shoulders stiffened. "Why?" "Because truth deserves a place where lies can't touch it," I said quietly. "And love deserves to rest where it won't be used." He didn't look at me then, just stared at the floor, his jaw tightening. "She told me you were being unreasonable," he murmured. "That you didn't trust her. That you'd never accept her, and you believed her." He flinched not visibly, but I saw it in his breathing. "I wanted to," he said finally. "It was easier." We sat in silence for a while. Outside, rain began to fall against the window. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like the world was listening. Then, without warning, his phone buzzed on the table. A message lit up the screen. Her name again. He didn't move to pick it up. Just stared at it as if the light itself accused him. "She said she'd handle everything," he whispered. "The paperwork. The meetings. She said she was doing it for me." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth was already unfolding inside him, quietly, inevitably. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. "I didn't know she asked for the shares." I thought he stopped mid-sentence, eyes widening slightly. "I thought you offered—" I looked at him, really looked at him. The boy I raised was still in there, buried under years of someone else's words. Someone else's rules. "She told me you didn't want to see me anymore," he said softly. "That I reminded you of Dad, that it was too painful." The tears came then, not mine, his. Silent, ashamed, unexpected. I wanted to reach out, but I didn't. Some lessons need to hurt to heal. He looked at me through those tears, a trembling apology in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't see it. Any of it." I smiled faintly, though it felt like my heart was being peeled open. "You weren't supposed to. That's how people like her work. They make you believe cruelty is care." The rain grew heavier, filling the silence between us. After a long while, he said, "What do I do now?" "Whatever you choose," I said. "But do it as the man I raised, not the one she made." He nodded slowly, like he understood. Then he reached for my hand, hesitant, fragile, but real. I didn't pull away. For the first time in years, there was no script between us, no distance. Just the quiet grief of two people who'd finally stopped lying to themselves when he left. I watched from the window as he walked down the street, shoulders hunched against the rain. He didn't look back, but he didn't have to. Some goodbyes carry a promise hidden inside them that maybe one day they'll return as beginnings. That night, I lay awake, listening to the storm fade into silence. My heart ached. Yes, but not with loss, with relief. Because sometimes truth doesn't destroy. It just removes the wrong people from your peace. And in that peace, the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. The night he came back to her was colder than it should have been for early spring. Maybe that's what guilt does. It changes the weather inside you. Daniel stood in the doorway of his house, dripping from the rain, staring at the woman who had taught him how to doubt his own mother. Lila looked up from the couch, her face lit by the glow of her phone. She didn't even look surprised. "You're soaked," she said. "Did you walk all the way there?" He didn't answer right away. He took off his jacket, tossed it over a chair. Water pooled on the floor, spreading in small, quiet circles. "I saw her," he said finally. Lila's posture shifted just slightly. "Oh, how was that?" "She's different, quieter. She's always been dramatic," Leela replied, a small smile curving her lips. "Let me guess. She tried to guilt you again?" He stared at her. "No, she didn't." That surprised her. "It wasn't in her script. She didn't ask for anything," he continued. "Didn't even mention the will." Now the smile faltered. "I told you, Daniel," she said, her voice softening into that manipulative kind of calm she used whenever she needed to reassert control. "Your mother likes to play the martyr. That's what people like her do. She twists things, make herself look righteous. You can't— She didn't twist anything," he cut in. His voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. "You did." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through bone. Lila blinked, her expression shifting, calculating. "Excuse me?" "She didn't ask for the shares," he said, pulling the folded document from his pocket. "The one with her handwriting on it." "You did. You told me it was a family decision." "You made me believe," she agreed. Her tone turned defensive fast. "That's not true. I saw the note, Lila." His eyes locked onto hers. "It's in your handwriting." For a second, her mask cracked. A flicker of panic flashed before she hid it behind that calm, icy composure she'd perfected over the years. "You're overreacting," she said. "It was a formality. We needed her signature for what?" He snapped. "For her house. Her savings. The last thing my father left her." He took a step closer. "You told me she didn't want me around because I reminded her of him. You said she needed space. You said she'd asked you not to let me visit." Lila's face hardened. "And you believed me. Wasn't a question. It was a reminder of how deeply she'd gotten under his skin." He nodded slowly. "I did. I believed everything you said. Because I loved you." Loved. Her voice cracked, the veneer of control thinning. Past tense. He didn't answer. He just looked at her, really looked. The woman standing before him was a stranger, wearing the face of someone he once trusted. "I saw my mother's apartment," he said softly. "It's small, barely furnished, but she looked at peace. Do you know how long it's been since I saw that in her face?" Lila crossed her arms. "You're being manipulated, Daniel. She's always done this, playing the saint to make you feel guilty. It's classic emotional abuse." He almost laughed. It wasn't funny. But something about the absurdity of her words felt like a release. "You don't even hear yourself," he said. "You took her house, her son, and now you're calling her abusive." Her jaw clenched. "I did what I had to do. She was toxic, Daniel. She was holding you back." He shook his head. "No, you were." She stared at him for a long time, then whispered, "You're making a mistake." He didn't respond. He turned and walked upstairs, each step heavier than the last. He didn't pack a bag that night. He didn't need to. He just sat on the edge of the bed that used to feel like home and realized it never truly had been. When he finally lay down, sleep didn't come. He kept hearing his mother's voice, calm and resigned. Do it as the man I raised, not the one she made. By morning, he'd made his choice. Lila woke up to silence. No coffee brewing. No sound of Daniel moving around. Just the faint echo of emptiness. She found a note on the kitchen counter. I'm staying with a friend for a while. Don't contact my mother. Don't contact me. It wasn't rage that broke her. It was irrelevant. For years, she'd built her identity on control. And now, for the first time, her grip had slipped. She tried calling. He didn't answer. She sent messages. Nothing. Over the next few days, the facade of her perfect life began to crack. People noticed her absence from events. Daniel's friends stopped replying to her messages. Even the neighbors, who used to envy her poise, now whispered as she passed. And then the letter arrived. It was from the lawyer, the same one handling the estate. Lila opened it, expecting negotiation, perhaps a reconsideration of the will. Instead, was final confirmation. Everything had been transferred to a charitable trust in the late husband's name. There was a handwritten note inside. In elegant cursive, unmistakably his mother's. May love always serve the living, not the greedy. Lila stared at the words until they blurred. For the first time in years, she didn't feel powerful. She felt small. Meanwhile, Daniel visited his mother again, not out of guilt, but longing. This time, he didn't knock. He stood outside her door for a long time before finally knocking softly. When she opened it, she didn't look surprised. She simply stepped aside. He entered quietly, carrying a small plant in his hands, something alive, something to replace what had died. I don't know where to start, he said. Don't, she replied gently. Just sit. They sat in the same silence that had once divided them, but it felt different now, less cold, more forgiving. After a while, he spoke. She's gone. I left. His mother nodded, not triumphantly, just knowingly. Good. I keep thinking about all the times I ignored you, he said. All the times you tried to tell me something was wrong? She smiled faintly. You weren't ready to hear it. People never are until the noise in their lives turns quiet. He looked at her, really looked the wrinkles around her eyes, the steadiness of her hands. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, she said softly, but I'll give it anyway. He closed his eyes and, for the first time, let the tears fall. The grief wasn't for what he lost, it was for what he'd willingly destroyed. She reached out and rested a hand over his. We can start again, she whispered. Not as what we were, but as what we choose to become. Outside, the world moved on, unbothered, unknowing. But in that small apartment, a mother and son began the slow, fragile process of rebuilding something greed had tried to bury. And somewhere far away, in a house that used to hum with lies, Lila sat alone, surrounded by everything she'd won and yet owned nothing that mattered. Because in the end, love doesn't beg to be believed. It just leaves quietly and lets the truth do the talking. The house was quieter now. Not because it was empty, but because peace has a different kind of silence than sorrow does. For months, I used to hear echoes of their voices in my head. My son's sharp words, her soft manipulation. But now there was just the hum of wind through the curtains. The sound of a life resetting itself. I had moved to a smaller place. Nothing grand. Just a cottage near the edge of town where mornings came wrapped in mist and the smell of wet grass. It suited me, this stillness. Here, I wasn't anyone's burden. I wasn't a mother being evaluated through someone else's eyes. I was simply a woman, learning how to exist again. People said time heals. They were wrong. Time doesn't heal. It only gives pain new rooms to live in. What truly heals is acceptance, the quiet surrender to what cannot be undone. For a while, I thought I'd never forgive him, not for what he did, but for what he allowed. But as the days unfolded into smaller, softer moments, anger began to fade. Sometimes, Healing starts when you stop rehearsing what broke you. I would see them sometimes by accident, at the market or across a parking lot. He'd always look smaller somehow, not in height, but in spirit. His face had aged not by years, but by regret. She would cling to him, always with the same smile, but her eyes carried something brittle, something hollow. I didn't look away, though. I wanted him to see that I wasn't haunted anymore. One morning, months after the will had been read, a letter came. His handwriting, shaky, uncertain. I left it on the counter for 2 days before opening it. The words were clumsy, but real. Apologies are buried under sentences that couldn't quite find their way to forgiveness. He said he didn't know how to face me, that every time he tried to sleep, he saw my face the night I left. He said silence had been louder than he expected. He ended it with, "If you ever want to see me again, I'll be here. I just need you to know I never stopped being your son." I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because some things deserve to stay suspended, like an unanswered prayer. I started volunteering at a community garden near the outskirts of town. Old women, widowers, forgotten souls. People who understood the quiet ache of being left behind. We didn't talk much. We just planted things. Lettuce, herbs, flowers. And somehow, those little green sprouts became my confessions. Each root is a reminder that even after everything, life still insists on growing. Sometimes, when the light hit the soil just right, I'd catch myself thinking of him as a child again, barefoot laughing, running through the backyard, holding my hand. It's strange how memory is both a gift and a curse. It doesn't ask permission to stay. But I'd learned something about love. Real love doesn't die when people betray it. It only changes form. It becomes distant. It becomes quite understandable. It becomes a strength. I forgave him silently, not through words, but through living well without bitterness. Because forgiveness, I learned, is not about making peace with the person who hurt you. It's about making peace with the part of yourself that still hopes they hadn't. Seasons changed. The garden grew wild that summer, vines curling over fences, bees floating lazily between blooms. I didn't stop them. I liked how nature ignored control, how it thrived in chaos. Maybe that's what healing was, not tidying the mess, but learning to live within it. Some afternoons, I'd sit by the porch with a cup of tea, the sun sinking low, air thick with the smell of mint and soil. Peace felt unfamiliar at first, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. But slowly it began to settle. My days weren't built around anyone's moods anymore. No waiting, no hoping, no trying to prove I deserved a place in someone's home. There was one evening, late autumn, when I saw him again. My son, he stood at the edge of the garden, unsure, like a boy who'd wandered too far from home. He didn't call out my name. He just watched me for a while, hands buried in his coat pockets. I didn't move either. The silence between us stretched long, fragile, almost sacred. Then he turned and left. No words exchanged. None needed. That night, I didn't cry. For the first time, I didn't ache for what used to be. Because I realized something simple. Love doesn't always mean returning. Sometimes it just means letting go without hatred. When winter came, the garden withered, as it always did. But I'd learned to see beauty even in decay, the way the frost painted silver along the dead leaves. The way life hid quietly beneath the surface, waiting for another spring. That's how I felt too. Not broken, just resting. I'd been told by a friend that he'd started therapy, that the marriage wasn't as perfect as they once pretended. I didn't ask for details. The truth is, knowing wasn't going to change anything. I had no desire for revenge, no interest in seeing karma unfold. The world has its own way of balancing what people do. I had my balance now, a rhythm that belonged only to me, sometimes. Late at night, I'd sit by the window, candle flickering, and think of the life I'd lived, the mistakes, the silence, the love that still lingers somewhere in the corners of my heart. If I could speak to that younger version of myself, the one who packed her bags quietly and walked away from her own home, I'd tell her this: you did not lose your son. You lost the version of him who couldn't see you. And sometimes that loss is mercy in disguise. It took me years to understand that love without respect is just devotion turned prison. And family, real family, isn't bound by blood, but by the willingness to protect each other's dignity. Now, when people ask if I ever regret leaving, I tell them no, because sometimes walking away is not abandonment. It's survival. Spring came again. The garden woke up. Shoots of green pushed through the dark soil like tiny promises. I ran my fingers through the dirt, feeling the pulse of something alive beneath it. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled without sadness attached to it. He hasn't come back since that day. Maybe he never will. But that's all right. I stopped measuring love by presence. Sometimes love is just a quiet wish that the person who hurt you finds their own way back to themselves. As for me, I found mine. And in that peace, I've realized that truth doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it sets you free. Maybe love isn't meant to last the way we imagine. Maybe it isn't about staying forever, but about teaching us what to hold and what to let go. I used to believe family was unbreakable, that blood was stronger than pride, that love could silence cruelty. I was wrong. Love, real love, isn't blind devotion. It's seeing clearly and still choosing kindness, even when the world has turned its back. When my son betrayed me, I thought my story had ended. I thought the years I'd poured into him, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, all of it had been erased. But pain doesn't erase love. It refines it. It strips away illusion until all that's left is truth. And the truth is this: sometimes the people we raise grow into strangers. Sometimes the ones we give everything to protect are the ones who wound us most deeply. But even then, we have a choice. To become bitter or to become free, there's a quiet kind of strength in walking away without shouting, in choosing silence when anger begs for noise. Because silence, when it comes from peace, carries more power than any revenge ever could. I used to replay every word, every moment, asking myself what I did wrong. But healing began the day I stopped asking why and started saying enough. Enough of being misunderstood. Enough of bending just to fit into a place where love had turned conditional. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, your child, your partner, your friend, I want you to know this: your worth isn't defined by the way they see you. Some people can only love you through the limits of their own understanding, and that's not your fault. The world teaches us that forgiveness is a gift to others, but it's not. It's a gift to ourselves. It's the quiet closing of a door that no longer leads home. It's the moment you breathe again, not because the past is gone, but because you've stopped dragging it behind you. So forgive not to reconcile, not to forget, but to reclaim your peace. I learned that strength isn't loud. It doesn't look like triumph. It looks like waking up one morning and realizing you no longer ache where it once hurt. It looks like sitting in a quiet room sipping tea and knowing that solitude doesn't mean loneliness. It means freedom. We all get one life, one story. And though we can't control how others play their parts, we can always rewrite our own ending. Mine began the day I stopped trying to be loved the way I deserved and started living as if I already was. If this story found you tonight, if it touched something you've been carrying quietly, I hope it reminds you that endings aren't always tragedies. Sometimes they're beginnings disguised as heartbreak. Tell me, have you ever had to walk away from someone you love just to save yourself? Share your story below, because maybe your voice will help someone else find their strength too. And if you want more stories like this, stories that remind us that survival isn't bitterness, but beauty born from pain, stay here with me. There's more to tell, because even after betrayal, life doesn't stop. It begins again, softer, slower, but somehow truer.